When most people think westerns, they think dusty saloons, gun duels at high noon, and men with no names. But here's the part Hollywood doesn't like to brag about. The genre is also soaked in romance, the kind that's fiery, messy, and unforgettable. Cowboys fall hard, women fight back, and passion rides alongside pistols. So which westerns gave us the biggest sparks? Let's saddle up and find out which love stories refuse to stay in the background. Duel in the Sun, 1946. If there's one western that scandalized audiences and thrilled them in equal measure, it's Duel in the Sun. They even nicknamed it Lust in the Dust. Hollywood legends. Gregory Peck and Jennifer Jones play lovers who don't just flirt, they combust. Jones is Pearl Chavez, a woman torn between two brothers on a Texas ranch. Peck is the wild one, reckless, magnetic, and dangerous to resist. Their relationship is chaotic, destructive, and impossible to look away from. Producer David O. Selznick didn't just want a western. He wanted an epic that rivaled Gone with the Wind, but with twice the heat. The film was loaded with sweeping Technicolor shots of blazing sunsets, thundering horses, and stolen embraces that pushed the edge for its time. Critics called it too much, too steamy, too melodramatic, but audiences couldn't stop watching. The film's climax is pure cinema legend, two lovers so bound by passion that even bullets can't break them apart. That's what makes Duel in the Sun unforgettable. It's not about cowboys saving towns or outlaws getting hanged. It's about how love, when it's reckless and raw, can burn brighter than any shootout. For all its flaws, this movie proved the Western wasn't just about grit. It could be about longing too, and it left a scar. McCabe and Mrs. Miller, 1971. Most Westerns painted the frontier as rugged, lawless, and larger than life. But Robert Altman's McCabe and Mrs. Miller dared to add something rarely seen in the genre: tenderness. Warren Beatty plays John McCabe, a gambler and hustler who thinks he's tougher than he really is. Julie Christie is Mrs. Miller, the businesswoman who sees through his charm. What follows isn't some easy Hollywood romance. It's fragile, aching, and devastatingly real. The love story unfolds in a muddy little town where survival feels impossible. McCabe dreams of being a big man, while Mrs. Miller runs her business with sharp calculation. Slowly, between arguments and alliances, something deeper forms. It's not passion in a barn with violins swelling. It's stolen glances, whispered words, and vulnerability cracking through their hardened fronts. Cinematographer Vilmos Zsigmond shot the film in a dreamy haze, giving the romance a sense of inevitability, like love blooming in the wrong season. Leonard Cohen's mournful songs float through the background, turning every touch into a quiet tragedy. And that ending? Brutal. While McCabe fights for his life in the snow, Mrs. Miller drifts into an opium dream, their love story slipping away with the frost. It's heartbreaking, but that's the genius of it. Altman proved that a Western romance didn't have to be fiery and loud. Sometimes, the quietest love stories are the ones that stay with you forever. Rio Grande, 1950. When you think John Wayne, you think towering cowboy, rifle in hand, leading the charge. But in Rio Grande, the Duke had a co-star who could match his presence, shot for shot: Maureen O'Hara. Their on-screen chemistry was legendary, and this film is proof that sparks can fly even in the middle of cavalry drills and Apache raids. Wayne plays Lieutenant Colum Kirby York, a tough officer stationed near the Mexican border. O'Hara is his estranged wife, Kathleen, who shows up to reclaim their son from the army. What follows isn't just a battle of wills. It's a rekindling of a love story that's been buried under pride and years of distance. Their arguments crackle with more heat than the desert sun. When they finally let their guard down, it's electric. Director John Ford knew exactly what he was doing. He frames their romance against cavalry maneuvers, campfire songs, and dusty landscapes. The war setting raises the stakes, but it's the intimacy that hits hardest. O'Hara was never a shrinking violet. She gives Wayne as good as she gets, making their reconciliation feel earned, not forced. Rio Grande showed that even the most hard-nosed soldier had a heart, and that Westerns could thrive on stories where love was just as commanding as loyalty to duty. It's a reminder that sometimes the bravest thing a cowboy can do isn't riding into battle. It's letting someone back into his heart. Silverado, 1985. By the mid-'80s, the Western was considered a dying breed. Then along came Silverado, a rollicking throwback that felt like a love letter to the genre itself. With a stacked cast including Kevin Kline, Scott Glenn, and Kevin Costner, it was packed with gunfights, barroom brawls, and big sweeping vistas. But tucked inside all that action is a surprisingly sweet romance subplot that makes it stand out. Scott Glenn plays Emmett, the seasoned cowboy with a quiet strength. His story isn't about revenge or treasure. It's about connection. Amidst the chaos of corrupt sheriffs and outlaw gangs, he forms a tender bond with a local woman. Their relationship doesn't scream for attention, but it lingers. In a movie bursting with energy, it's those quiet, gentle moments that give Silverado its beating heart. Director Lawrence Kasdan balanced the old-school Western thrills with modern storytelling. By letting romance breathe between the gunfire, he reminded audiences why the genre mattered in the first place. It wasn't just about settling scores. It was about settling hearts. While audiences came for the action, many left remembering the warmth of that romance. And in a film that could have been just another revival attempt, that emotional anchor is what gave Silverado lasting power. Proof that even the wildest Western ride is better when there's love at the campfire. Maverick, 1994. Let's be honest, Maverick could have been a forgettable remake. Instead, it turned into one of the most entertaining Western comedies of the '90s, thanks largely to the sizzling dynamic between Mel Gibson and Jodie Foster. Forget the poker tables for a second. The real game being played here is flirtation. Gibson is Brett Maverick, a charming gambler who lives by wit more than by gun. Foster is Annabelle Bransford, a con woman who's just as slippery and twice as clever. From the moment they meet, it's a duel of words, glances, and schemes. One moment they're allies, the next they're sabotaging each other, and underneath it all is undeniable attraction. Director Richard Donner keeps the banter sharp and fast, turning their romance into a comedic cat-and-mouse chase. The beauty of it is how natural their chemistry feels. Gibson leans into his roguish grin, Foster plays it sly and confident, and together they create one of the most playful romances in Western cinema. The movie itself is loaded with cameos, stunts, and clever twists, but without that romantic spark, it wouldn't have half its charm. Maverick proved that you didn't need grit and blood to keep the Western alive. Sometimes all you need is two characters falling for each other while trying desperately not to admit it. The Big Country, 1958. Some Westerns are all about the gunsmoke. The Big Country is about the fireworks of pride, land, and love. Gregory Peck plays James McKay, an Easterner who rides into the rough frontier for marriage, only to find himself stuck between warring ranch families. On the surface, it's a story of cattle feuds and masculinity. But underneath, it's a slow-burning romance that sneaks up on you. McKay is engaged to Patricia Terrell, daughter of a wealthy rancher. But when he falls for Gene Simmons' schoolteacher Julie, everything shifts. What makes the romance powerful here is its contrast. Patricia represents status, expectation, and tradition. Julie represents freedom, honesty, and true partnership. McKay's decision between them isn't just about love, it's about the man he wants to be in this unforgiving land. William Wyler directed it with sweeping cinemascope grandeur, every frame echoing the tension of wide-open spaces and wider emotional divides. Burl Ives even won an Oscar for his supporting role, but it's the love story that makes the film linger. You can feel the push and pull of McKay's heart as clearly as the winds whipping across the plains. The Big Country proves romance in Westerns doesn't have to be about passion exploding in secret barns. Sometimes it's about choosing who you'll stand beside when the dust settles. That makes this film not just a cattle epic, but a frontier love story of the highest order. Cat Ballou, 1965. Most Western romances are played straight. Cat Ballou threw the whole rulebook out the window. Jane Fonda plays Catherine Cat Ballou, a schoolteacher turned outlaw who's equal parts charm, grit, and defiance. The movie itself is a comedy western, filled with songs, pratfalls, and outrageous stunts, but it also carries a warm-hearted romance at its core. Cat's love interest is Clay Boone, played by Michael Callan, a small-time crook who joins her gang. Their relationship is playful and mischievous, mirroring the film's tone. Instead of brooding silences or fiery confrontations, their romance is built on banter, teamwork, and stolen moments of tenderness amidst chaos. It's the rare Western where you find yourself grinning through the romance instead of holding your breath. The movie is also famous for Lee Marvin, who steals the show as a drunken gunfighter and won an Oscar for it. But what keeps Cat Ballou from being just another comedy romp is the romantic spark that grounds it. Fonda's cat isn't just a caricature. She's a woman balancing revenge, justice, and her heart. By the end, the romance adds an unexpected sweetness to the story, proving that even in the wackiest Western, love can sneak in and steal the spotlight. Cat Ballou may be unconventional, but that's exactly what makes its romantic heartbeat unforgettable. Westward, The Women, 1955. Here's a Western that doesn't get talked about enough. Westward, The Women flips the genre on its head by focusing on women, specifically a group of mail-order brides trekking across brutal frontier land. Directed by William A. Wellman, it's less about duels and more about determination. But make no mistake, the romantic undercurrent is as strong as a desert wind. The story follows a group of women traveling from Chicago to California to marry settlers. Along the way, they endure hardship, tragedy, and brutal tests of endurance. Romance here isn't about passion-filled declarations. It's about resilience, trust, and the quiet bonds that form when survival is on the line. Relationships blossom naturally, built from respect and shared struggle rather than flashy gestures. For 1951, this was groundbreaking. Instead of damsels waiting to be saved, these women drive wagons, bury their dead, and push forward when the men falter. That flips the idea of frontier romance on its head. Love becomes less about domination and more about survival partnership. Westward, The Women shows that romance in the Old West wasn't always about fireworks. Sometimes it was about finding the one person who'd stand beside you when everything else fell apart. And that makes it one of the most underrated love stories the Western ever produced. Heaven's Gate, 1980. Few films crashed harder than Michael Cimino's Heaven's Gate. It was blamed for nearly bankrupting United Artists, and critics tore it apart on release. But look past the infamy, and you'll find a Western with one of the most complicated, ambitious love stories in the genre. Chris Christopherson plays James Averill, a Harvard graduate turned Wyoming Marshal, caught up in the Johnson County War. But the emotional core of the film is his love triangle with French brothel owner Ella Watson, played by Isabel Huppert, and hired gun Nate Champion, played by Christopher Walken. It's tender, passionate, and tragic, and it gives the epic scope of the movie its human heart. The romance works because it's messy. Ella doesn't belong to either man. She belongs to herself, and her love is split between loyalty and desire. Cimino laces their relationship into the larger story of class struggle, immigration, and violence, making the romance inseparable from the politics. Sure, the film's pacing and length drove critics mad, but its love story? It's daring, unconventional, and devastating. When the bloodshed hits, it's that triangle you remember most. Heaven's Gate may forever be infamous as a flop, but in terms of romantic storytelling, it's bolder than most safe Hollywood love stories. And in the Wild West of cinema history, that's something to admire. The Ballad of Cable Hogue, 1970. Sam Peckinpah wasn't exactly known for tenderness. He was the poet of violence, the master of blood-soaked finales. Which is why The Ballad of Cable Hogue feels like such a revelation. Here, Jason Robards plays Cable Hogue, a down-on-his-luck drifter who finds water in the desert and builds a life around it. Along the way, he falls in love with Stella Stevens' character, Hildy, a prostitute with dreams of her own. What makes their romance special is how genuine it feels. Unlike most Western romances that burn quick and fast, Cable and Hildy's love is playful, grounded, and full of small joys. They tease each other, laugh together, and imagine futures that feel almost attainable. It's tender without being syrupy. And for Peckinpah, that was a radical shift. The film still has his trademark grit, but the love story is what makes it stand out. Robards and Stevens have a chemistry that feels lived in, not staged. Their romance isn't about conquest. It's about companionship in a world that doesn't hand out happy endings. The Ballad of Cable Hogue proved Peckinpah could do more than shootouts and slow-motion death scenes. He could capture the humor, sweetness, and vulnerability of love on the frontier. It's one of the most human Western romances ever put on screen, and it still surprises people who only know Peckinpah for blood and bullets. Legends of the Fall, 1994. Some people argue this isn't a Western, but let's be real. It's got sprawling Montana landscapes, frontier grit, and a family saga soaked in love and war. That's close enough. And when it comes to romance, Legends of the Fall doesn't just dabble, it goes all in. Brad Pitt, Aidan Quinn, and Henry Thomas play the three Ludlow brothers. Julia Ormond is Susanna, the woman whose arrival shifts their lives forever. What starts as a simple engagement becomes a tangled love story that stretches across decades. Susanna is drawn to all three brothers in different ways, but it's Pitt's Tristan, wild, untamed, magnetic, who ignites the screen. Their romance is tempestuous, heartbreaking, and unforgettable. Director Edward Zwick paints love here as both intoxicating and destructive. Sweeping mountain shots frame moments of passion and despair, giving the story an almost mythic quality. The romance isn't just a subplot. It's the driving force of everything that happens, the wars, the rivalries, the betrayals. Some critics called it melodramatic, but that's exactly the point. Frontier love stories were rarely neat, and this one embraces every messy, gut-wrenching detail. Legends of the Fall is proof that Westerns could deliver romance on an epic, operatic scale, one that leaves audiences equal parts wrecked and awestruck. True Grit, 1969 and 2010. Now here's a curveball. Neither version of True Grit is technically a romance. But dig a little deeper, and you'll find the heart of both films lies in a different kind of love, loyalty, and unspoken affection. The story follows Maddie Ross, a determined young girl who hires Rooster Cogburn to hunt down her father's killer. In both the John Wayne version and the Coen brothers remake with Jeff Bridges, the relationship between Maddie and Rooster isn't romantic in the traditional sense, but it's one of the most powerful bonds in Western cinema. There's a tenderness beneath the gruffness. Rooster is a drunk, a brawler, and a gunman past his prime, but through Maddie's eyes, he finds something worth fighting for beyond money or pride. She sees the good buried under the grit. He sees the strength in her that no one else does. That connection, that quiet affection, becomes the film's emotional center. Sometimes romance in Westerns isn't about kissing in the rain or fiery declarations. Sometimes it's about finding someone who'll ride beside you, no questions asked. True Grit shows that even in the hardest landscapes, love can take on unexpected, deeper forms. Open Range, 2003. Kevin Costner's Open Range is often praised for its gritty realism and one of the greatest shootouts of modern westerns. But what really elevates it is the slow-burn romance between Costner's Charlie Waite and Annette Bening's Sue Barlow. Charlie is a man haunted by violence, traveling the open range with Robert Duvall's boss Spearman. Sue is the sister of a local doctor, caught up in the brutal feud between ranchers. Their relationship develops quietly, almost cautiously. There are no grand gestures here, just awkward conversations, shy smiles, and a growing trust that feels achingly authentic. What makes it remarkable is how Costner, both star and director, takes his time. In a genre built on speed and showdowns, he lets love bloom slowly, like grass after a hard rain. By the time the bullets fly, you're as invested in Charlie and Sue's connection as you are in the fight for justice. Open Range proved that westerns could be tough as iron and tender as a whisper in the same breath. It's a romance that feels mature, grounded, and earned, and it might just be one of the most underrated love stories in modern cinema. Red River, 1948. Howard Hawks' Red River is often remembered as a cattle drive epic and one of John Wayne's finest roles. But beneath the dust and the tension between Wayne and Montgomery, Clift lies a fiery romantic subplot that deserves more attention. Joanne Drew plays Tess Millay, a woman who enters the story late but leaves a lasting impact. Surrounded by stubborn, pride-driven men locked in their own battle, Tess provides a spark of humanity and love that cuts through the testosterone-fueled conflict. Her romance doesn't just soften the edges, it changes the trajectory of the entire story. Wayne's character, Thomas Dunson, is a tyrant of a trail boss. Clift's Matt Garth is his adopted son, and their conflict threatens to tear everything apart. Tess steps in as a mediator and a lover, reminding the men that there's more to life than land and cattle. It's romance as redemption, love as the thing that keeps people from destroying each other. Without Tess, Red River would just be a grim tale of power and stubbornness. With her, it becomes something richer, a story about how love can hold its own, even against the hardest men of the West. Ride the High Country, 1962. Sam Peckinpah's Ride the High Country is often hailed as one of the first truly elegiac westerns, marking the twilight of the genre's golden age. It stars Randolph Scott and Joel McCrea as aging lawmen trying to transport gold through dangerous country. But the film's emotional heartbeat lies in the romance between Mariette Hartley's Elsa Knudsen and her chosen partner, away from the oppressive control of her strict family. Elsa's story is one of liberation. She flees a life of arranged marriage and suffocating expectations, finding her own path in the brutal frontier. Her romance is fragile, but it represents hope, a reminder that even in a world ruled by violence and greed, there's room for tenderness. Peckinpah, who would later become famous for his blood-soaked films, treats this romance with surprising gentleness. It gives the movie a bittersweet tone, a sense that love is both fleeting and eternal. Ride the High Country closes not with a blaze of glory, but with a quiet dignity, anchored by the idea that love, however imperfect, gives meaning to the struggle. In a genre built on death and dust, that makes it one of the most human westerns ever made. So there you have it, proof that westerns weren't just about grit, gunpowder, and grit again. They were about love, too. From fiery romances that burn everything down to quiet bonds that sneak up on you, these films show the Wild West had more heart than Hollywood often admits. Which one of these stories stuck with you the most? Drop it in the comments. Hit subscribe for more forgotten classics. And remember, sometimes the toughest cowboys were the ones who dared to fall in love.